White cops tied a black man to a pole for fun, not knowing he was their new chief. The gavel's crack echoed through the packed courtroom, silencing the murmurs that had been building like a brewing storm. Judge Sarah Maxwell's stern gaze swept across the sea of faces, landing finally on District Attorney Michael Harrison. His shoulders remained square despite the weight pressing down on them, the weight of a case that had torn Millbrook County apart. Behind him, camera shutters clicked like angry crickets, each flash capturing what would become tomorrow's headlines. The people of Millbrook County versus Officers Thompson and Reed, the clerk announced, her voice cutting through the tension. Everything was about to change. Hey everyone, before we dive into this powerful story, take a second to drop your location in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see where Justice Warriors are watching from today. Michael Harrison stood before the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time that morning. At 42, the flecks of gray at his temples weren't just from the stress of being Millbrook County's newest district attorney, they were badges of a 15-year battle in civil rights law. His dark eyes, usually sharp with determination, carried shadows from another sleepless night. "You don't have to do this," Sarah, his wife of 18 years, said from the doorway. Her voice carried the weight of countless similar conversations. "You know I do," Michael replied, finally satisfied with his tie. "Millbrook isn't just another assignment. This is home." Home. The word carried complicated echoes. Millbrook County had shaped him, son of Thomas Harrison, the county's first black police sergeant, grandson of civil rights activist James Harrison. The family legacy hung heavy around his neck, heavier than any tie. He picked up the case file from his dresser, thick with documents that would make most prosecutors hesitate. But Michael wasn't most prosecutors. His father's words from 20 years ago still rang in his ears. "The law is meant to protect everyone, son, not just those who wear the badge." Walking down the stairs of their Victorian home, a symbol of how far the Harrison family had come, Michael paused at the photo wall. 3 generations of Harrison men in uniform, his grandfather in his World War II military dress, his father in his police blues, and Michael in his first day as an assistant DA in Chicago. Different uniforms, same fight. His phone buzzed another message from Robert Chin, his deputy DA, Channel 7 requesting comment on Thompson case. Also protest gathering outside courthouse. Michael slipped the phone into his pocket without replying. The media circus would have to wait. This morning he had a more important audience, the victim's family. Through the kitchen window he could see his 16-year-old daughter Emma practicing basketball. She had her grandmother's height and his determination. Last week she'd asked him why some of her friends' parents had stopped coming to their house for dinner. "The truth isn't always comfortable, baby," he'd told her. "But that doesn't make it any less necessary." Sarah handed him his travel mug of coffee, her touch lingering on his hand. "Just remember, you're not your father's son or your grandfather's grandson today. You're the DA. This has to be about the law, not legacy." Michael nodded, though they both knew it wasn't that simple. In Millbrook County, population 47,000, everything was about legacy. The same families had held power for generations in the police force, in business, in politics. The Harrisons had fought their way up through service and sacrifice, but they were still seen as outsiders by some. His father had died trying to change the system from within, taking 3 bullets during a drug bust that later proved to be a setup. The investigation had been rushed, the conclusions convenient, the questions buried. Michael had been a law student then, watching from the sidelines as justice failed his family. Now, 20 years later, he stood on the other side of the law with the power to dig up those buried questions. But this case wasn't about personal vengeance. It was about something bigger, the chance to finally break the cycles of power that had controlled Millbrook for generations. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Judge Maxwell's office. "The victim's family is ready to meet." Michael grabbed his briefcase, feeling the weight of the evidence inside. Photos, testimonies, body cam footage, pieces of a puzzle that would either bring justice or tear the community apart. Maybe both. "I'll be late tonight," he told Sarah, kissing her goodbye. "Just be careful," she replied. "Remember what happened to your father when he pushed too hard." Michael stepped out into the crisp morning air, the sun just beginning to burn through the fog. In his mind, he could hear his grandfather's voice: "Justice isn't about being careful, boy, it's about being right." He got into his car, catching his reflection in the rearview mirror. Today, he wasn't just Michael Harrison, district attorney. He was the answer to prayers some families had been whispering for generations. And that made him dangerous to people who liked things just the way they were. Millbrook County sprawled across the Virginia countryside like a faded quilt, patches of old wealth stitched together with working-class neighborhoods and farmland. Main Street still bore the proud facades of 19th-century architecture, though now they housed artisanal coffee shops alongside generations-old hardware stores. The courthouse, a towering Greek revival structure, cast its shadow across the town square every afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock. Behind the preserved historic district lay the real Millbrook. The east side boasted gated communities where judges and business owners lived in carefully manicured isolation. The west side told a different story: modest homes, some dating back to the post-war boom, others showing the wear of decades of delayed maintenance. The railroad tracks that bisected the town weren't just a physical boundary, they were a socioeconomic line drawn in steel and rust. Police Chief William Bill Thompson, S.R., had overseen this divide for 25 years from his corner office in the red brick police station. His son, Officer James Thompson, now patrolled the same streets, carrying his father's name and prejudices like a badge of honor. The Thompson family had put 7 officers on the force over 3 generations, each one rising through the ranks with suspicious speed. The local paper, the Millbrook Chronicle, operated from a small office near the courthouse. Editor-in-Chief Margaret Peggy Walsh had inherited the position from her father, just as he had from his. The paper's editorial stance had remained unchanged for 50 years: pro-business, pro-police, pro-status quo. At Lily's Diner, the unofficial hub of local politics, breakfast crowds divided themselves by unspoken rules. Table 1 belonged to retired police officers, Table 6 to courthouse staff, and the corner booth to whatever city council member needed a quiet place to make deals. The waitresses knew everyone's orders and everyone's secrets, though they kept the latter to themselves. The newest addition to Millbrook's power structure was the tech company campus on the outskirts of town. Silicon Valley money had brought new faces and new tensions. Young professionals moved into hastily built condos, driving up property values and driving out long-term residents. The city council called it progress, others called it invasion. Reverend James Walker's First Baptist Church stood as a bridge between old and new Millbrook. His Sunday sermons drew both housing project residents and corporate executives, though they rarely spoke to each other after the service. His daughter, Dr. Rachel Walker, had returned from medical school to open a clinic in the West Side neighborhood where she grew up, charging on a sliding scale that often slid to 0. The high school football games still drew crowds every Friday night, but even there the separation was visible. The East Side parents filled the reserved seats with cushions monogrammed with their family names. West Side families stood along the fence, sharing thermoses of coffee and complaints about rising rent. In the courthouse halls, portraits of past judges formed an unbroken line of similar faces, all male, all white, all bearing names that appeared repeatedly in the county records. The only exception was a small photo near the water fountain: Thomas Harrison in his sergeant's uniform, added after his death in what the official report called a tragic accident. The police force reflected this hierarchy. Veterans like Officer Reed had their pick of shifts and patrols, usually choosing the quiet East Side beats. Newer officers worked the West Side, where calls were more frequent and praise was rare. Complaints against officers were filed in triplicate and lost in drawers, while commendations were fast-tracked to personnel files. At the county jail, the demographics told their own story. The cells filled and emptied with a predictable pattern West Side addresses, minor offenses, bail amounts just high enough to keep families scrambling. The East Side residents who found themselves arrested usually made one phone call to the right person and were home by dinner. This was the Millbrook that Michael Harrison had inherited, a town where justice moved at 2 speeds, where power flowed through channels dug generations deep, and where change was treated like an unwelcome stranger. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. In break rooms and barbershops, on front porches and in church basements, people were beginning to whisper about the new day and the changes he might bring. Some whispered with hope, others with fear, but everyone knew Millbrook was a powder keg and Harrison might just be the spark. The video appeared on social media at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 68 seconds of shaky footage that would change everything. James Walker, a 17-year-old honor student, lay face down on the wet asphalt, his varsity jacket soaking up rain and blood, while officers Thompson and Reed stood over him. The timestamp showed 10:23 p.m. just after basketball practice, just 3 blocks from home. "Stop resisting," Thompson's voice cracked through the night air, though the video clearly showed James lying motionless, hands already cuffed behind his back. Reed's boot pressed between the boy's shoulder blades, unnecessary force captured in harsh streetlight. "I can't breathe," James gasped, the words barely audible over the rain. "Please." A woman's voice behind the camera, "He's just a kid." "What are you doing?" Angela Martinez, chemistry teacher at Millbrook High, had been grading papers late when she heard the commotion. Her hand trembled as she recorded, but she kept filming. Thompson turned toward the camera, his face twisted with anger. "Mom, step back." "This is police business." His hand moved to his weapon, a gesture so casual it spoke of habit rather than necessity. The footage ended abruptly as Reed approached Angela, but not before capturing his words, "You're interfering with an arrest. That's a crime in Millbrook County." By midnight, the video had been shared 10,000 times. By dawn, national news networks were running it on loop. James Walker's school photo appeared alongside the footage, a bright-eyed boy in a blue blazer, his future stretching out before him like an open road. That future now hung by a thread as he lay in intensive care, his orbital bone shattered, 3 ribs cracked, and his promising basketball career possibly ended by nerve damage in his shoulder. Michael Harrison's phone rang at 12:15 a.m. Chief Thompson's voice carried decades of authority. "Just some kids causing trouble, Mike. We're handling it internally. No need for your office to get involved." But at 12:45 a.m., another call came through. Dr. Rachel Walker, her voice tight with controlled fury. "They did this to my nephew, Michael. James was walking home from practice. He had his hands up. They didn't even tell him why they stopped him." The hospital waiting room became ground zero for Millbrook's brewing storm. The Walker family gathered in silent dignity, James's parents, Marcus and Lisa, clutching each other's hands, Rachel pacing in her scrubs, Reverend Walker praying quietly in the corner. Outside, reporters gathered like vultures, their cameras flashing through the plate glass windows. By morning, 2 narratives emerged. The official police report claimed James had matched the description of a robbery suspect, had resisted arrest, and had reached for his waistband. Thompson and Reed were placed on paid administrative leave, standard procedure, the department spokesperson emphasized. But witnesses began coming forward. The basketball coach confirmed James had left practice at 10:15 p.m. wearing his team jacket. Security footage from Milestone Bank showed him walking calmly, hands in plain sight, when the patrol car first approached. And in Angela Martinez's complete footage, recovered from her phone despite apparent attempts to delete it, Officer Thompson could be heard clearly, "Let's see how tough you are now, boy." The word boy echoed through Millbrook's history like a gunshot. The same word Thomas Harrison had heard 20 years ago before 3 bullets ended his investigation into department corruption. The same word James's grandfather had heard during the civil rights marches of the 1960s. At 9 a.m., Michael Harrison stood in the hospital corridor, watching through the window as machines breathed for James Walker. The boy's face was so swollen his own mother had wept at the sight. On the whiteboard, a nurse had written his vital signs in a single-word scholar. Harrison's phone buzzed constantly, the mayor urging caution, Judge Maxwell asking about his approach, reporters demanding statements. But it was the last message that made his hand tighten around the phone, an anonymous text, "Remember your father." Some cases aren't meant to be solved. Outside the hospital, two crowds gathered. On one side, protesters with hastily made signs, "Justice for James, Black Lives Matter, End Police Brutality." On the other, a smaller group, mostly off-duty officers and their families, "Back the Blue, Support Our Police, All Lives Matter." Between them stood the future of Millbrook County, balanced on a knife's edge of change and resistance. In his office, Chief Thompson looked at the photos on his wall, 3 generations of Thompsons in uniform, his son's face newest among them. His hand reached for the phone, decades of influence ready to be called in. But in the hospital room, James Walker's heart monitor beeped steadily, marking time like a metronome of justice delayed, and in Michael Harrison's pocket, Angela Martinez's complete video waited like a loaded gun, ready to shatter the foundations of power that had ruled Millbrook for generations. The stage was set. The only question remaining was who would make the first move in this dangerous game where justice and power collided, and where the truth might cost more than anyone was prepared to pay. The Millbrook Police Department's press conference was a masterclass in damage control. Chief Thompson stood at the podium, his silver hair and pressed uniform projecting authority and calm. "We understand the community's concerns," he began, each word measured and rehearsed. Officers Thompson and Reed followed department protocol in response to a credible threat. "We ask the public to reserve judgment until our internal investigation is complete." Behind the chief, a wall of blue officers standing shoulder to shoulder, badges gleaming under fluorescent lights. Their message was clear: the thin blue line would hold. But in Michael Harrison's office, a different story unfolded through witness statements. Angela Martinez sat across from him, her hand steady now as she recounted the events. "They didn't announce themselves as police," she said. "James had his headphones in. He didn't even hear them approach. When he turned around, Officer Thompson already had his baton out." The teacher's eyes hardened. "I've worked here 15 years. Those officers patrol around the school. They knew exactly who James was." Outside, Millbrook divided along familiar lines. The East Side Country Club buzzed with worried whispers about property values and the danger of outside agitators. Real estate agent Barbara Reed, Officer Reed's wife, assured her clients that everything would blow over. "These things always do," she said, pouring coffee into bone china cups. Meanwhile, the West Side erupted in peaceful protests. Students from Millbrook High walked out of classes, led by James's basketball teammates. They wore their varsity jackets just like the one James had been wearing that night and carried signs with his senior quote, "The future belongs to those brave enough to shape it." The school board called an emergency meeting. Principal Davidson, sweat beading on his forehead, tried to straddle the divide. "While we support our students' right to expression, we must maintain order and focus on education." The words rang hollow in a half-empty auditorium, while hundreds of students chanted outside. Local businesses chose sides through their silence or support. Lily's Diner put up a "Back the Blue" sign, losing half their customers but gaining fierce loyalty from the others. The new coffee shop on Main Street displayed "Black Lives Matter." In their window, their young owner standing firm despite anonymous threats to her lease. At First Baptist Church, Reverend Walker's Sunday sermon cut through the tension like a sword. "Justice is not a political position," his voice rang out. "It's a moral imperative." Half the congregation stood and applauded. The other half sat in stony silence, including 3 police board members and their families. The Millbrook Chronicle's initial coverage prompted widespread cancellations. Editor Peggy Walsh's carefully neutral headline, "Community Divided Over Police Incident," satisfied no one. Online comments turned toxic, revealing the racism that had always lurked beneath Millbrook's polite surface. In the police department, invisible lines were drawn. Younger officers, especially those of color, watched their older colleagues rally around Thompson and Reed with growing unease. Anonymous tips began reaching Harrison's office, small things at first: scheduling irregularities, missing complaint forms, body cam footage from previous incidents that never made it to review. Sarah Harrison faced the backlash at her real estate office. Longtime clients suddenly found other agents. Her charity board position was quietly not renewed. At Emma's basketball games, other parents shifted away, leaving empty seats around her like a quarantine zone. The mayor called Michael to a private meeting at his country club. "Think about your career, Mike," he advised, swirling expensive scotch. "Think about your family. There are other cases, other battles. Why this one?" But in the hospital, James Walker began to breathe on his own. His first words, through swollen lips, were captured by his aunt's phone. "Did anyone get their badge numbers?" The police union lawyer arrived from Richmond, bringing polish and precision to the department's defense. "Officer Thompson and Officer Reed have exemplary records," he declared to reporters. "They've served this community faithfully for years. One incident, taken out of context, shouldn't erase that history of service." What he didn't mention were the sealed complaints, the missing reports, the pattern that Michael Harrison was slowly uncovering. Each piece of evidence landed on his desk like a puzzle piece, forming a picture of systematic abuse hidden behind badges and bureaucracy. Late one evening, as Harrison worked through another box of records, a custodian paused in his doorway. "My boy was stopped by them last year," the old man said quietly. "No report filed, no reason given, but he still takes the long way home to avoid that street." The custodian shuffled away before Harrison could respond, but his words hung in the air like smoke. How many others had similar stories? How many had stayed silent, believing justice was a privilege reserved for the other side of the tracks? In his holding cell, James Thompson Jr. stared at the wall, his father's warnings echoing in his head. This is how it's always been. This is how it has to be, but for the first time he wasn't sure he believed it. The battle lines were drawn, but they weren't straight. They curved through families, friendships, and institutions, forcing everyone in Millbrook to choose comfort or conscience, silence or justice, the past or the future. This brave district attorney deserves a like for standing up against corruption, but unfortunately no one has hit that button yet. Let's show Michael Harrison our support. The box arrived anonymously at Michael Harrison's office, a dusty relic from the courthouse basement. Inside, yellowed files told stories that echoed the present with haunting precision. 2004, a black teenager stopped for suspicious behavior left with a broken arm. 1998, a Hispanic college student resisting arrest, his scholarship dreams ended by a concussion. 1992, a woman's complaint of excessive force, mysteriously withdrawn after her husband lost his city job. Each case followed the same pattern: officers Thompson and Reed, often working together, their reports pristine, witnesses suddenly uncooperative, investigations closed without action. But between the official lines, truth bled through like water stains. "You need to see this," Robert Chen said, placing a VHS tape on Harrison's desk. The footage, grainy and dated 1997, showed a younger officer Thompson handling a traffic stop. The same aggressive stance, the same escalation, the same words, "Let's see how tough you are." The victim that time had been a promising young lawyer. He never practiced law again. Harrison spread the files across his conference table, creating a timeline of buried injustice. Names jumped out: Thompson, Reed, their training officers, their supervisors, a dynasty of power passing from father to son, partner to partner. The same judges signing off on dismissed cases, the same prosecutors declining to pursue charges. In his father's old diary, Harrison found notes about the drug bust that killed him. Thomas Harrison had been investigating a connection between missing evidence and certain officers' unexplained wealth. The last entry, dated 3 days before his death, mentioned both Thompson and Reed by name. Rachel Walker brought more pieces to the puzzle. "Look at the hospital records," she said, spreading charts across Harrison's files. Every time they brought someone in, they claimed the injuries were pre-existing or self-inflicted. But the patterns tell a different story: specific types of injuries, similar locations on the body. These weren't accidents. The courthouse janitor, Mr. Jenkins, had worked there for 40 years. Late one evening, he lingered in Harrison's office. "Your daddy wasn't the first," he said quietly. "Back in '85, Officer Martinez, no relation to the teacher, started asking questions about missing drug evidence. Found him in his car 2 weeks later. Heart attack, they said. But I cleaned that car. There were marks on his neck." Former officers began reaching out, cautiously at first, then with growing urgency. Officer Sarah Rodriguez, retired since 2001, brought recordings she'd secretly kept. "They forced me out when I reported Thompson for planting evidence," she said. "Told me to think about my pension, my family. I've been carrying this guilt for 20 years. The evidence painted a picture larger than 2 rogue officers. This was a system, carefully maintained through generations, a network of power that reached from patrol cars to judges' chambers, from evidence lockers to bank accounts. Harrison discovered a pattern in property seizures. Homes and cars confiscated in drug raids often ended up owned by shell companies linked to police department families. Small businesses on the West Side faced frequent inspections and fines until they sold always to buyers connected to the same network. A retired court clerk, Mary Wilson, trembling with age and fear, brought spreadsheets she'd secretly maintained for decades. Every case involving certain officers, certain families, always handled by specific judges. Always the same outcomes. I started tracking it in '79. Didn't know what to do with the information, but couldn't bear to destroy it. The pattern extended beyond the police department. Building permits, business licenses, school disciplinary actions all showed the same bias, the same names and positions of influence. The system wasn't broken, it was functioning exactly as designed. Harrison found his father's old partner, now living in Florida. Tom knew he was getting close to something big, the former officer said via secure video call. Said he had evidence of officers working with drug dealers, controlling territory, taking cuts. The night before he died, he called me, said he finally had proof that went all the way to the top. That proof had vanished along with Thomas Harrison's life, but its shadow remained in bank records, property deeds, and carefully worded meeting minutes. A decades-long conspiracy of silence and profit, built on badges and broken bodies. Angela Martinez's current video wasn't just evidence of one incident, it was the latest chapter in a long story of abuse. Each file in the dusty box represented a life altered, a future denied, a family scarred. The victims' names read like a roll call of crushed dreams, future doctors, teachers, lawyers, all derailed by encounters with officers who saw their badges as licenses for brutality. The hardest evidence to face was the most personal. In his father's case file, Harrison found photographs that had never been included in the official report. They showed defensive wounds on Thomas Harrison's hands, powder burns indicating close-range shots, and a curious detail: his notebook was missing from his effects, though he'd never worked a day without it. As Harrison pieced together the historical pattern, he realized James Walker's case wasn't just about justice for one teenager. It was a chance to break a cycle that had strangled Millbrook for generations. But the same forces that had silenced his father were still in power, still watching, still willing to protect their system at any cost. Late one night, as Harrison studied the files, his office phone rang. A digitally altered voice spoke 5 words history repeats itself. "Ask your wife." He rushed home to find Sarah standing in their driveway, shaken but unhurt, staring at their garage door. Spray painted in red, some lessons run in families. The threat was clear, but so was the fear behind it. For the first time in decades, the old guard was running scared. They had good reason. In his office safe, Harrison had something they didn't know about: his father's missing notebook, delivered anonymously. Detective Marcus Thompson sat across from his brother James in the police station break room, steam rising from untouched coffee cups between them. "You had to do it, didn't you?" Marcus said, his voice low and strained. "Had to prove something to Dad, just like always." James Thompson Jr. stared at his reflection in the dark liquid. "You weren't there, Marcus. The kid was." "The kid was James Walker," Marcus cut in. "Honor student, basketball star, son of Marcus Walker. You remember him? Dad's partner before Harrison? The same Harrison whose son is now building a case against you." The brothers' relationship had always been complicated by their father's shadow. Marcus had chosen detective work, avoiding patrol duty and its temptations of power. James Jr. had followed their father's footsteps exactly down to partnering with Reed, whose own father had trained under Thompson S.R. At home, Sarah Harrison found another threatening letter in their mailbox. This one contained old newspaper clippings about Thomas Harrison's death, with certain words highlighted: tragic accident and survived by wife and son. She didn't show it to Michael, adding it instead to the growing file she kept hidden in her home office. Emma Harrison faced her own battles at school. Her basketball teammates, mostly West Side girls, treated her like a hero. The East Side students whispered Snitch's daughter as she passed. During practice, she caught a hard elbow to the ribs, an accident, the coach said, but her attacker's smirk told a different story. Chief Thompson's wife, Eleanor, hosted her weekly bridge club, maintaining appearances while her world crumbled. "William hasn't slept through the night since it happened," she confided to her closest friend. "He keeps saying he failed. James Jr. should have taught him better." But what father doesn't want his son to follow in his footsteps? Rachel Walker struggled with her own conflict. As James's aunt and a doctor, she'd sworn to heal, but each time she changed her nephew's bandages, rage burned through her professional detachment. The same hands that had hurt James now wore thin blue-line bracelets, gifts from supporters who saw them as heroes. Officer Reed's teenage daughter, Ashley, deleted her social media accounts after classmates shared screenshots of her father's racist post from years ago. At dinner, she asked questions that made her parents' silverware freeze mid-air. Did James Walker really have a weapon? Why didn't you turn on your body cams? Michael Harrison's childhood friend, Detective Marcus Thompson, left a bourbon bottle on his desk with a note: "Remember when life was simpler, before we had to choose between family and right." Inside the bottle was a USB drive containing years of internal communications that could break the case wide open. The weight of generational loyalty pressed down on every interaction. At church, families who had shared pews for decades now sat apart. The annual police department barbecue was quietly canceled. Little League teams reorganized as parents requested transfers for their children. Sarah Harrison's real estate business hemorrhaged clients, but new ones appeared. West Side families finally ready to challenge housing discrimination, backed by a civil rights law firm. Her commission check shrank, but her spine straightened with purpose. Emma found her father in his study late one night, surrounded by case files. "Dad," she said, "Ashley Reed sits alone at lunch now. No one talks to her. This isn't her fault." Harrison looked at his daughter, seeing the complexity of justice through her eyes. The children of Millbrook were paying for their parents' sins and stands, carrying burdens they didn't choose. During a late-night strategy session, Robert Chin pointed out the personal cost. "Your father died for this fight," he said. "Are you ready to risk everything too?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Harrison's answer came in pieces. Sarah's quiet strength as she reported another slashed tire, Emma's straight back as she faced whispers in school hallways, James Walker's determined struggle through physical therapy. Each reminder that justice wasn't just a legal concept, it was personal, costly, and necessary. Marcus Thompson made his choice over whiskey at Lily's Diner. "Dad always said loyalty to the badge comes first," he told Harrison. "But he never said which badge, the metal one we wear, or the oath we took to protect and serve." The personal stakes crystallized one Sunday morning when Harrison found his father's old badge in his mailbox, bent and beaten, with a note like "Father, like son." The threat was clear, but so was the fear behind it. The old guard was running scared, lashing out at the familiar patterns shattered around them. That night, Harrison sat his family down. "We can step back," he offered. "Move somewhere safer, start fresh." Emma spoke first. "Running won't help Ashley Reed, or James Walker, or the next kid they decide doesn't belong here." Sarah reached for his hand. "Your father stood his ground. So will we." The personal became political as more families chose sides. Officer Reed's wife filed for divorce, unable to reconcile her hospital administration job with defending brutality. Chief Thompson's daughter, a civil rights lawyer in Boston, published a scathing op-ed about systemic racism in small-town police departments. The cost was high, but the stakes were higher. Every family dinner interrupted by threatening calls, every slashed tire, every cold shoulder at the grocery store reinforced what Harrison had always known: change doesn't come cheap, and justice demands more than just legal arguments. It demands the courage to break generational chains, even when those chains are wrapped around your own family tree. The anonymous envelope landed on Harrison's desk early Monday morning. Inside, a thumb drive contained footage from police cruiser dash cams, not just from the night of James Walker's assault, but from dozens of incidents over the past 5 years. Each video showed the same pattern: Thompson and Reed working together, escalating routine stops into violent confrontations, particularly with minority citizens. "Your father kept records too," read the note attached. The handwriting matched his father's old partner, Detective Marcus Thompson, who had disappeared 3 days ago, leaving only a cryptic text following the money: "Watch your back." Harrison's team worked through the footage in shifts, documenting timestamps, badge numbers, and discrepancies between official reports and video evidence. Robert Chin discovered a pattern in the metadata: certain incidents had been logged as equipment malfunction, exactly 8 minutes after they occurred. They were systematically erasing evidence, Chin explained, pointing to his findings. But they didn't know about the cloud backup system installed last year. Every deleted file left a ghost. Rachel Walker brought hospital records showing a spike in resisting arrest injuries on nights when Thompson and Reed patrolled together. The injuries followed a specific pattern: right shoulder, left ribs, facial contusions. "They had a signature," she said grimly, "like artists signing their work." The investigation expanded beyond excessive force. Financial records revealed a complex web of shell companies. Properties seized in drug raids were being sold at auction to companies owned by police department families. Thompson S.R.'s wife sat on the auction review board. Officer Reed's offshore accounts showed regular deposits matching dates of major drug busts. His wife's real estate firm had sold houses to known drug dealers at inflated prices, the excess payments disappearing into numbered accounts. A young officer, Amy Rodriguez, came forward with recordings from roll call meetings. They called it street cleaning, she explained, hands shaking as she played the audio. "Target certain neighborhoods, certain people, make them uncomfortable enough to move, then watch property values rise." The evidence painted a picture of corruption spanning decades. Traffic stops were used to intimidate potential witnesses. Drug evidence disappeared from lockup, only to reappear on streets controlled by friendly dealers. Complaint forms vanished, witnesses recanted, and anyone who asked questions faced consequences. Harrison found his father's old case notes hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer. Pages of detailed observations about drug shipments, property sales, and offshore transfers. The final entry, dated the day before his death, contained a single line connected all 3 families: "God help us." The 3 families, Thompson, Reed, and Maxwell, had controlled Millbrook for generations. Judge Maxwell's court sealed records and approved warrants without question. The Thompson family provided muscle and badges. The Reeds handled the money through real estate and investment firms. Marcus Thompson's investigation into the money trail led to a startling discovery. The police pension fund had been investing in the same shell companies buying seized properties. Officers nearing retirement were promised special investment opportunities in exchange for their silence. Angela Martinez brought more evidence: students' cell phone videos showing Thompson and Reed's aggressive behavior at school events, particularly toward minority students. They were grooming the next generation, she explained, teaching them who had power and who didn't. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Ashley Reed, Officer Reed's daughter, appeared in Harrison's office clutching her father's old phone. "I found this when Mom was packing his things," she said quietly. There are messages about Uncle Tom Harrison, about what really happened that night. The messages revealed a coordinated effort to silence Thomas Harrison. Officers Thompson and Reed had been assigned to watch him, report his movements, and handle the situation if necessary. The orders came from higher up, much higher. Harrison's team worked around the clock, connecting dots that had been deliberately scattered over decades. They uncovered a pattern of targeted harassment, financial fraud, and brutal enforcement of unwritten rules. The system wasn't broken, it was operating exactly as designed. Late one night, as Harrison reviewed evidence, his office phone rang. A familiar voice, digitally altered: "You're piecing it together, just like your father did. Remember what happened to him?" But unlike his father, Harrison wasn't working alone. Supportive officers began coming forward, tired of carrying the weight of silence. They brought evidence of tampered body cams, falsified reports, and coordinated cover-ups. The investigation revealed that James Walker's assault wasn't a random act of violence, it was a message. His father, Marcus Walker, had been asking questions about property seizures before partnering with Thomas Harrison. The attack on James was a reminder of old threats. Sarah discovered that her real estate competitors had been working with the police to maintain neighborhood segregation. Property listings were coded, showing dates to avoid when people of color inquired about East Side homes. Emma's basketball teammate, Lisa Chin, brought surveillance footage from her family's restaurant showing officers Thompson and Reed accepting envelopes from known drug dealers. "My parents were too scared to come forward," she explained. "But I'm not." Ooh. The evidence mounted like a tsunami building offshore. Financial records, witness statements, video footage, and decades of suppressed complaints formed a wave that would either cleanse Millbrook or tear it apart. Harrison knew they had one chance to get this right. If they moved too soon, evidence would disappear. If they waited too long, more people would get hurt. The same system that had killed his father was still in place, still powerful, still willing to do whatever it took to protect itself. But this time was different. This time, the truth had too many voices to be silenced. As Harrison prepared to present his findings to the state attorney general, he received one last piece of evidence: a USB drive from Marcus Thompson, timestamp showing it was mailed just hours before his disappearance. The file contained a single video: Chief Thompson, Judge Maxwell, and the mayor discussing how to handle Thomas Harrison's investigation. The date: one day before his death. The smoking gun had finally surfaced, and with it, the power to break generations of corruption. Harrison locked the evidence in his safe, made copies for secure locations, and called his family. The next few days would change everything. The only question was, would Millbrook survive the truth? The first brick came through Emma's bedroom window at 2:17 a.m., showering glass across her basketball trophies. Sarah rushed in to find her daughter huddled in the corner, phone in hand, already calling 911. But when the patrol car arrived, the officers took their time walking the perimeter, flashlight sweeping casually across obvious boot prints in the garden. Probably just kids, they said, not meeting Harrison's eyes. Everyone knew better. The threats escalated daily. Sarah found her client files corrupted at work, years of data erased. Emma's college recruitment letters mysteriously stopped arriving. Anonymous calls filled their answering machine recordings of Thomas Harrison's last radio transmission before his death. Harrison watched his family bend but not break under the pressure. Sarah started carrying a taser, checking under her car each morning. Emma learned to scan rooms for exits to vary her routes to school. They stopped eating at restaurants after the second case of food poisoning. "Maybe we should send Emma to Aunt Linda's," Sarah suggested one night, after another threatening letter arrived. This one contained photos of Emma at basketball practice taken with a telephoto lens. Harrison saw the fear behind his wife's calm expression, the same fear he'd seen in his mother's eyes 20 years ago. The professional isolation cut deep. Courthouse staff who'd once greeted him warmly now hurried past with averted eyes. His secretary requested a transfer. Even Robert Chen, his most loyal deputy, received midnight visits from officers concerned about his family's immigrant-owned businesses. Judge Maxwell called him to chambers, ostensibly to discuss case scheduling. "Your father was a good man," she said, studying him over her glasses. "Good men often die before their time in Millbrook, especially men who don't understand the natural order of things." The investigation consumed him. He worked late into the night, surrounded by evidence of corruption that stretched back generations. Sarah would find him asleep at his desk, case files spread around him like fallen leaves. The distance between them grew, measured in unspoken fears and protective lies. Emma's basketball team made it to state finals, but she played to half-empty bleachers. Former friends' parents had forbidden them from attending her games. She didn't complain, but Harrison saw her checking her phone less often, saw the forced smile when she said she was just focusing on her game. Rachel Walker brought more hospital reports, her hands shaking with rage. "They're targeting anyone who speaks up," she said. "Minor accidents, sudden illnesses. Nothing provable, but everyone knows her clinic had lost its liability insurance after anonymous complaints." The hardest blow came from Marcus Thompson. Harrison found him in Lily's diner at midnight, nursing a whiskey. "They got to my daughter," Marcus said, pushing over his phone. Pictures showed his college-age daughter's dorm room ransacked, her laptop missing. "I have to stop helping you. I'm sorry, Mike. Family first." Harrison understood the cost others were paying. Angela Martinez was passed over for department head despite her seniority. Robert Chen's mother's small grocery store faced sudden health inspections. Even the janitor who'd provided old records found his son's disability payments delayed by administrative reviews. Sarah's real estate office was vandalized 3 times in 2 weeks. Each time, the responding officers took hours to arrive. The security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. Insurance claims were denied. She kept working, but her smile grew tighter, her shoulders tenser. Emma found crude messages scratched into her locker, her basketball uniform shredded. College scouts who'd shown interest suddenly stopped calling. Her coach, torn between loyalty and survival, reduced her playing time. "I have other players to think about," he explained weakly. The pressure took its toll on their marriage. Late-night conversations turned into tense silences. Sarah stopped sharing her daily struggles, trying to protect him from more guilt. Harrison caught her researching houses in other states, but neither mentioned it. Their home, once a refuge, became a fortress. Security cameras, alarm systems, motion sensors, all necessary, all a constant reminder of danger. They stopped hosting dinner parties after the 3rd time guest cars were vandalized. Friends drifted away, scared of being caught in the fallout. Rachel Walker brought news from the hospital board. "They're threatening to revoke my privileges," she said, claiming my involvement in the case compromises my judgment. Her hands, steady in surgery, trembled as she poured coffee. Every day brought new casualties. Officer Rodriguez, who'd provided roll call recordings, found her personnel file stuffed with bogus complaints. Robert Chen's sister lost her teaching job over suddenly discovered irregularities in her certification. The isolation grew suffocating. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Church members requested different pews. Even the grocery store checker's smile seemed strained, as if friendliness itself had become dangerous. Harrison recognized the strategy, the same one used against his father. Death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to seem coincidental, all adding up to a clear message: stop now or lose everything. At night he'd watch Emma doing homework, Sarah reviewing property listings, both pretending everything was normal. The weight of their sacrifices pressed down on him like lead. Was justice worth the cost? Was he fighting for truth or for his father's ghost? The answer came unexpectedly. Emma found him in his study past midnight, case files spread across his desk. "Dad," she said, her voice steady, "Ashley Reed gave me something today." She pulled out a thumb drive. It's her dad's body cam footage, the real one from that night. She says she can't live with the lies anymore. Harrison stared at his daughter, seeing not just Emma, but generations of silence broken, of courage finding its voice. The cost was high, but the price of silence would be higher. That night, Sarah found him on the back porch, staring at the security cameras. "We're not running," she said, answering his unspoken question. "Your father stood his ground, so will we." The personal cost was mounting, but so was the evidence. Each attack, each threat, each act of intimidation left a trail. The old guard was getting desperate, making mistakes. They didn't understand that some things, justice, truth, integrity, were worth any price. The courtroom fell silent as James Walker took the stand, his varsity jacket hanging loose over shoulders, still stiff from physical therapy. His voice, steady despite the pressure, carried to every corner of the packed gallery. "I had my headphones in, listening to gameplays Coach sent us," he testified. "When I felt the first hit, I thought I was being jumped. Then I heard them laughing." Judge Maxwell's attempted interruptions grew increasingly desperate as Walker's testimony continued. "Relevance, counselor?" she asked repeatedly, but Harrison's foundation was solid. Each detail connected to a larger pattern of abuse. The prosecution's evidence unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Angela Martinez's video played on courtroom screens, its clarity devastating. Frame by frame, Harrison dissected the footage, highlighting Thompson and Reed's coordinated movements, their practiced brutality. "Notice Officer Thompson's stance," Harrison pointed out. "The same stance appears in 17 other incidents over the past 5 years. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography." Reed's lawyer objected constantly, his desperation showing. Speculation, prejudicial, but the pattern was undeniable. Harrison introduced body cam footage from previous incidents, each showing the same tactics, the same escalation, the same casual cruelty. Rachel Walker's medical testimony proved crucial. "These injuries form a specific pattern," she explained, laser pointer tracking across anatomical diagrams. "Consistent with trained techniques, not random violence. They knew exactly what they were doing." The defense tried to paint James as a threat. They brought up a detention from 6th grade, a minor argument at a basketball game. But their narrative crumbled when Harrison produced James's college acceptance letters, coach's recommendations, and community service records. Thompson Jr. took the stand, his arrogance cracking under Harrison's cross-examination. "We followed procedure," he insisted, but his testimony contradicted the video evidence. When Harrison played his father's recordings discussing Thomas Harrison's murder, Thompson's face went ash white. "Isn't it true," Harrison pressed, "that your father ordered the harassment of any officer who questioned department practices? That Thomas Harrison's death was a message to others who might speak up?" The objection came instantly, but the damage was done. Jurors leaned forward, connecting dots that had been scattered for decades. Financial evidence proved even more damaging. Harrison's team had tracked every seized property, every suspicious auction, every offshore transfer. The web of corruption emerged clearly, connecting police brass to judges, real estate developers to drug dealers. Judge Maxwell's attempts to limit testimony grew increasingly transparent. When Harrison introduced evidence of her family's connections to seized property sales, she faced demands for recusal. Her replacement, a retired state judge, had no local ties to protect. The defense's case relied heavily on character witnesses, fellow officers testifying to Thompson and Reed's dedication to duty. But under cross-examination, their stories revealed the department's toxic culture. Every witness accidentally confirmed the pattern of harassment, the unwritten rules, the cost of speaking out. Ashley Reed's testimony silenced the courtroom. "I heard them planning it," she said, tears streaming as she described overhearing her father and Thompson discussing James Walker. "They said they needed to send a message to the West Side, that no one could be allowed to rise above their place." The prosecution's final witness was Marcus Thompson. Found living under an assumed name in Seattle, he testified via video link about years of documented corruption. His evidence filled the gaps, providing context for every incident, every cover-up, every act of retaliation. Harrison's closing argument resonated beyond the courtroom. "This isn't just about one night of violence," he told the jury. "This is about a system designed to maintain power through fear. James Walker's only crime was believing he could walk home safely in his own neighborhood." The defense's closing focused on procedure and tradition. They spoke of difficult split-second decisions, of dangers faced by police. But their words rang hollow against the mountain of evidence showing years of calculated abuse. As the jury deliberated, Harrison received one final threat: a photo of his father's grave, freshly dug up, with a note room for more Harrisons, but the old tactics had lost their power. The truth had too many voices now. The verdict came after 4 days of deliberation. Thompson and Reed were found guilty on all counts: assault, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. But Harrison wasn't finished. He announced investigations into 3 decades of similar incidents. Judge Maxwell resigned the next day, citing health concerns. Chief Thompson announced early retirement. The mayor called for a complete department overhaul. The old guard was crumbling, their power evaporating in the harsh light of justice. The sentencing hearing brought more revelations. Victim impact statements poured in, dozens of former residents describing years of harassment and abuse. Each story strengthened the pattern, justifying the maximum sentences Harrison requested. Thompson and Reed faced decades in prison, but the legal battle had achieved something larger. It had exposed the machinery of corruption, the cost of silence, and the possibility of change. Other departments across the state faced similar investigations as the ripples of Millbrook's case spread. The courtroom emptied after sentencing, but Harrison remained, staring at his father's badge on the prosecution table. 20 years of buried truth had finally seen daylight. The price had been high, but justice demanded payment in full. Outside, reporters clamored for statements, but Harrison's attention was on James Walker, standing tall in his varsity jacket. The young man's injuries had healed, but his presence reminded everyone sometimes justice comes through unexpected champions. The legal victory was complete, but Harrison knew this was just the beginning. Other cases waited, other victims needed voices, other systems needed change. The true measure of success would be in Millbrook's future, in whether every citizen could walk home without fear. As he packed his briefcase, Harrison found a note from James Walker. "Your father would be proud," simple words that carried the weight of generations of struggle, of broken silence, of justice finally served. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters when Harrison emerged. Among them stood Emma and Sarah, their presence reminding him that some battles are worth any cost. The sun was setting on Old Millbrook, and a new day was about to begin. The media siege of Millbrook intensified as the trial progressed. National news vans clogged Main Street, their satellite dishes blooming like metal flowers. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC crews competed for the best camera angles outside the courthouse, while social media turned every development into trending hashtags. Millbrook Justice and Walker Strong competed with Back the Blue and Stand with Thompson across Twitter. Each side claimed moral high ground, turning the case into a referendum on policing in America. Celebrity activists descended on the town, their presence adding fuel to an already volatile situation. Reverend Walker's church became both sanctuary and command center for supporters of justice. Civil rights organizations set up operations in the basement, coordinating protests and managing media relations. But across town, the police union established its own headquarters at the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge, bringing in PR specialists and crisis management teams. Conservative media painted Harrison as an activist more interested in political points than justice. Another example of the war on police, Tucker Carlson declared, dedicating an entire segment to defending Thompson and Reed's split-second decision-making under pressure. Progressive outlets countered with deep dives into Millbrook's history of segregation and police brutality. The New York Times published a front-page expose titled "The Town That Silence Built," detailing generations of systemic racism and corruption. Death threats arrived daily at Harrison's office, each one more specific than the last. The FBI's threat assessment team moved in, establishing a command center in the courthouse basement. Agents shadowed Harrison's family, their presence both reassuring and a reminder of the stakes. Professional pressure mounted from unexpected directions. The state police union called for Harrison's disbarment, claiming prosecutorial misconduct. The mayor faced recall efforts from both sides, one group claiming he wasn't supporting law enforcement, the other demanding he do more for reform. National police unions launched a campaign questioning Harrison's motives. Full-page ads appeared in major newspapers, featuring Thompson and Reed's service records while conveniently omitting their complaints' history. Police departments across the country sent representatives to show solidarity, filling local hotels with a sea of blue uniforms. Civil rights organizations responded with their own campaign. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund filed amicus briefs. Black Lives Matter organized peaceful marches that drew thousands. Celebrity activists like Common and John Legend tweeted support for James Walker, their millions of followers amplifying the case. The pressure divided families across Millbrook. Officer Rodriguez's parents stopped speaking to her after she testified, their loyalty to the old system outweighing blood ties. Ashley Reed's mother filed for sole custody, claiming her father's supporters had made their home unsafe. National political figures tried to capitalize on the controversy. A conservative senator introduced legislation to limit prosecutions of police officers. A progressive congresswoman used Millbrook as an example in her police reform bill. The town became a symbol, its specific truth lost in broader debates. Harrison faced pressure from the state attorney general's office to accept a plea deal. Think about the department's morale, they argued. Think about recruitment, but each suggestion of compromise felt like betrayal of not just James Walker, but every victim who'd never seen justice. Sarah's real estate office received hundreds of one-star reviews from police supporters across the country. Local banks, feeling pressure from longtime clients, began questioning her business loans. The financial squeeze was calculated and coordinated, a modern form of old-fashioned blackballing. Emma's basketball scholarship offers mysteriously disappeared. College scouts who'd been enthusiastic suddenly couldn't be reached. The message was clear: the punishment for seeking justice would extend across generations, just as the corruption had. Social media became a battlefield. Every development spawned new conspiracy theories. Bot armies amplified extremist views on both sides. Local residents found their personal information exposed online, forcing many to go private or disconnect completely. The pressure extended to witnesses. Angela Martinez faced a coordinated harassment campaign from police supporters nationwide. Her teaching credentials were challenged in multiple states. Her social media accounts were hacked. Her private photos leaked. Rachel Walker's medical practice received hundreds of fake complaints to the state medical board. Insurance companies began questioning their relationships with her clinic. Each attack was designed to exhaust resources and resolve, to make the cost of standing up too high to bear. National law enforcement organizations published articles questioning Harrison's prosecution strategy. Legal experts debated trial tactics on cable news. Each development was dissected, analyzed, and weaponized by opposing sides. The town's economy suffered as tourism dropped. Small businesses struggled as potential customers avoided the controversy. The Chamber of Commerce begged both sides for resolution, caring more about profits than justice. Old money families threatened to relocate their businesses, taking jobs with them. International media arrived, framing Millbrook's story within global discussions of police reform and systemic racism. The BBC produced a documentary titled American Justice on Trial. Al Jazeera covered daily protests. Millbrook became a case study in how small-town corruption could capture world attention. Harrison's own party pressed him to consider his political future. "You could run for state office," they hinted. "If you handle this carefully." The offer of power in exchange for compromise echoed the very system he was fighting. As the trial progressed, outside pressure grew more sophisticated. Professional crisis managers crafted narratives. Social media campaigns targeted specific demographics. Each side employed data analytics to maximize their message's impact. The national conversation overshadowed local reality. Cable news pundits debated policing statistics while ignoring James Walker's ongoing physical therapy. Viral tweets discussed systemic racism while Millbrook's actual black residents faced continued harassment. Through it all, Harrison maintained focus on the case itself. Each piece of evidence, each witness testimony, built toward truth that no amount of external pressure could diminish. The facts spoke louder than hashtags, clearer than pundit debates. The pressure peaked during final arguments. Protesters and counter-protesters filled the streets. National Guard troops stood ready. The world watched Millbrook, waiting to see if one small town could deliver the justice that so many others had denied. In his office late one night, Harrison found a quote from his father's diary: "Pressure either crushes or creates diamonds." Looking out at the media circus his case had spawned, he understood finally that truth was the diamond, and justice worth any pressure required to reveal it. Hey there, if this story moved you like it moved me, let's stay connected for more powerful narratives about justice and change. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in stories that matter, because together we can make sure voices like these are never silenced. The verdict echoed through Millbrook like a thunderclap. Guilty on all counts, repeated on every news channel, bounced across social media, and rippled through generations of silence. Thompson Jr. and Reed stood motionless as the jury foreman read each charge, their faces gray with disbelief. Behind them, their families crumpled, the weight of justice finally breaking their privileged shells. Chief Thompson resigned before sunset. Judge Maxwell announced her retirement by email. The mayor, reading the winds of change, called for a complete department overhaul. The old guard was falling, dominoes toppling in rapid succession. James Walker sat in his wheelchair, Rachel's hand on his shoulder as the verdict was read. His expression remained steady, but tears rolled down his cheeks. "It's really over," he whispered to his aunt. "They really believe me." Harrison gathered his team in his office afterward. The celebration was subdued, heavy with the knowledge that victory carried responsibility. "This isn't the end," he told them. "It's a beginning. Every case we buried, every complaint we ignored, they all come back now." Sarah brought champagne to the office, but they drank it from paper cups, too exhausted for ceremony. Emma arrived with her basketball team, all wearing Justice Served t-shirts. The sight of their young faces, bright with hope, drove home the significance of the moment. The national media painted it as a watershed moment in police accountability. Local coverage was more nuanced, acknowledging the pain of a community divided and slowly healing. The Millbrook Chronicle's headline read, "Simply Change Comes to Main Street." Officer Rodriguez was appointed interim chief, the first woman and person of color to hold the position. Her first act was to open every internal affairs file from the past 20 years. No more secrets, she declared at her swearing-in. No more silence. The police union leadership resigned en masse, replaced by younger officers who'd supported the prosecution. They immediately called for new training protocols, community oversight, and transparency measures that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Ashley Reed's testimony had broken the case open, and now she faced her own resolution. Her father refused to see her in jail, but her mother filed for divorce, claiming the courage to leave an abusive marriage after watching her daughter stand for truth. Marcus Thompson emerged from witness protection, returning to Millbrook as a consultant on police reform. His daughter, safe and thriving in college, began speaking at police accountability forums. Their family story became a testament to choosing truth over toxic loyalty. Harrison discovered that change came in unexpected ways. Old enemies reached out privately, sharing long-held secrets. Former officers admitted to witnessing abuse, their consciences finally outweighing their fear. Each confession added to the growing mosaic of truth. Rachel Walker's clinic received anonymous donations from police families, quiet acknowledgments of guilt and hope for healing. The hospital board reinstated her privileges with a public apology. Her patient load doubled as people sought care without fear. Angela Martinez was named Teacher of the Year, her courage in filming the incident recognized by the State Board of Education. Her students created a journalism club dedicated to documenting truth in their community. The first issue of their newsletter featured James Walker's story. The courthouse walls, long adorned with portraits of judges who'd protected the status quo, saw change. Thomas Harrison's photo joined the gallery, no longer hidden near the water fountain. Beside it, a plaque commemorated all who'd fought for justice in Millbrook. Sarah's real estate business transformed. She specialized now in helping minority families buy homes in previously restricted neighborhoods. The same banks that had pressured her now sought her advice on community investment programs. Emma's basketball team made state championships. In the final game, James Walker sat courtside, cheering from his wheelchair as she scored the winning points. The photo of their celebration hug went viral, a symbol of Millbrook's new generation. The FBI's investigation expanded, following evidence of corruption across state lines. Other departments faced scrutiny, other communities began questioning their power structures. Millbrook became a case study in how to break cycles of institutional abuse. Harrison found his father's old badge in his desk drawer, its tarnish finally matching the truth of its history. He placed it in the county museum's new exhibit, Justice Delayed, not denied, the transformation of Millbrook law enforcement. The resolution brought unexpected peace to unexpected places. Officer Reed's wife visited him in jail, their first honest conversation in decades. She brought divorce papers and forgiveness, understanding that both were necessary for healing. James Walker began physical therapy with renewed determination. His basketball career was over, but he'd found a new passion. Law school application sat on his desk, each personal statement beginning with the night that changed everything. The old FOP Lodge was converted into a community center, its first program a youth police dialogue series. Former officers sat with teenagers, listening to their experiences, learning to see the town through different eyes. Harrison walked through Millbrook's changed streets, noting small signs of transformation. Mixed groups of kids played basketball in the park. Police officers walked beats in pairs, stopping to chat with residents. The invisible lines that had divided the town for generations began to blur. The resolution wasn't perfect. Some wounds would take generations to heal. But in coffee shops and church basements, at basketball games and board meetings, people began having honest conversations about power, justice, and change. 1 year after the verdict, Millbrook hosted its first Unity Festival. East Side and West Side residents shared food, music, and stories. Under the same trees where Jim Crow laws had once been enforced, children of all backgrounds played together, their laughter a different kind of justice. Harrison kept the last threatening letter he'd received framed on his office wall. Its message, "Some things never change," served as a reminder that progress required constant vigilance. But beside it hung a new photo, James Walker standing from his wheelchair for the first time, proving that change was always possible. The ripple effects of the verdict spread through Millbrook like waves in a disturbed pond. Officer Thompson Jr. and Reed's sentencing 25 years each without parole sent shockwaves through police departments nationwide. But the real consequences ran deeper, touching every corner of the community they'd terrorized for so long. The police department underwent a complete restructuring. Half the force resigned or took early retirement, unwilling to serve under new accountability measures. Their replacements included more women, minorities, and officers from outside Millbrook, each vetted thoroughly by a community oversight board. Chief Rodriguez's reforms went beyond personnel changes. Body cameras became mandatory, with footage automatically uploaded to servers outside department control. Regular psychological evaluations were instituted. Most significantly, a civilian review board gained real power to investigate complaints. The courthouse saw its own revolution. Judge Maxwell's replacement, an African-American woman from the state appeals court, began reviewing decades of suspicious verdicts. Cases were reopened, sentences reconsidered, lives restored piece by piece. Property seized during Thompson and Reed's reign returned to original owners or their families. The auction review board was dissolved, replaced by a transparent process overseen by state authorities. Real estate values adjusted, neighborhoods began to integrate, and the invisible lines dividing Millbrook started to fade. Sarah Harrison's real estate office became a hub for this transformation. She partnered with civil rights attorneys to challenge discriminatory housing practices. East Side properties, long restricted by unwritten rules, welcomed new residents. The changing demographics sparked uncomfortable conversations but necessary growth. Emma's college recruitment picked up again, but she chose a local university instead of Division I offers. Some things are more important than basketball, she explained at the signing ceremony. She planned to major in criminal justice, turning her family's legacy into a career. James Walker's recovery progressed beyond physical healing. Though his basketball dreams ended, he discovered a talent for public speaking. His story of survival and justice inspired audiences across the country. College acceptance letters piled up, each one a victory over those who tried to limit his future. The consequences reached into unexpected places. Ashley Reed, ostracized by her father's supporters but embraced by truth seekers, started a support group for children of corrupt officers. Breaking the Blue Wall became a national organization helping families choose integrity over loyalty. Rachel Walker's medical practice expanded to include trauma counseling for victims of police brutality. Insurance companies, sensing changing winds, reversed their restrictions. Her clinic became a model for community healing, bridging gaps between law enforcement and residents. Angela Martinez developed a curriculum on civic responsibility and justice, adopted by schools statewide. Her students learned to question authority respectfully but firmly, to document truth, to stand up for right regardless of consequences. The Millbrook Chronicle underwent its own transformation. Peggy Walsh retired, replaced by a young editor committed to investigative journalism. The paper's first major expose revealed corruption in surrounding counties, proving Millbrook's disease wasn't contained by city limits. Officer Rodriguez's reforms inspired changes beyond the police department. City Hall instituted transparency measures. The school board diversified. Even the country club, long a bastion of exclusivity, revised its membership policies under pressure from younger members. Thompson S.R.'s pension was revoked after evidence emerged of his role in Thomas Harrison's death. The money funded scholarships for minority students pursuing law enforcement careers. The first recipient was James Walker's younger sister, determined to change the system from within. The consequences touched personal lives deeply. Marriages ended as spouses confronted long-buried truths. Friendships fractured and reformed along lines of principle rather than privilege. Sunday church services saw new seating arrangements as people chose conscience over comfort. For Harrison, the professional consequences were significant. State officials discussed electoral possibilities, but he declined political ambition. Justice isn't a stepping stone, he said. It's a destination. Instead, he focused on training other prosecutors in evidence-based corruption cases. Sarah's business model shifted entirely. She now specialized in fair housing initiatives, helping families break through decades of residential segregation. Her commission rates dropped, but her satisfaction soared as she watched Millbrook's neighborhoods slowly integrate. Emma's generation faced their own consequences. They inherited a town in transition, wrestling with issues their parents had buried. At school, frank discussions replaced uncomfortable silences. Sports teams, clubs, and social groups reflected growing diversity. The old guard's influence crumbled quickly. Country club membership dropped. Traditional power brokers found their calls unanswered. A new network emerged, based on merit and integrity rather than family names and favors. James Walker's family channeled their pain into purpose. His father established a legal aid fund for victims of police misconduct. His mother joined the Civilian Review Board. Even his youngest siblings understood their role in Millbrook's changing story. Some consequences were subtle but significant. Police response times equalized across town. Traffic stops showed no racial disparities. Property values stabilized as artificial barriers fell. Small changes accumulated into substantial transformation. Harrison kept a consequences board in his office, tracking both victories and challenges. Each entry represented lives changed, careers restored, records expunged, families reunited. But it also showed ongoing struggles, resistance to change, lingering prejudices, the long shadow of generational trauma. The final consequence was perhaps the most profound. Hope became tangible in Millbrook. People walked taller, spoke freer, dreamed bigger. Children played without fear, parents worried less, and the future felt open rather than predetermined. 1 year after the verdict, Harrison stood at his father's grave, sharing quiet news of change. The consequences of justice had cost dearly but paid in ways that mattered most. Millbrook would never be the same, and that was exactly the point. The new Millbrook Police Department took shape under Chief Rodriguez's steady hand, each reform carefully crafted to prevent history from repeating. The building itself underwent renovation, its fortress-like facade erased with glass walls and open spaces. Transparency starts at home, Rodriguez explained at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Reform began with hiring. Every new officer underwent enhanced background checks, including social media history and interviews with former colleagues. Psychological evaluations became mandatory, focusing on implicit bias and conflict resolution skills. The force's demographics shifted gradually, reflecting the community it served. Training transformed completely. De-escalation techniques replaced aggressive containment strategies. Cultural competency wasn't just a buzzword but a core requirement. Officers spent time in community service before receiving their badges, learning to see residents as neighbors rather than suspects. The Civilian Oversight Board, once powerless, gained real authority. Its members, elected from all neighborhoods, reviewed body camera footage, investigated complaints, and made binding disciplinary recommendations. Officers initially resisted but gradually accepted this new accountability as normal. Technology played a crucial role. Advanced body cameras activated automatically during any citizen interaction, uploading footage to secure servers outside department control. GPS tracking ensured patrol patterns covered all neighborhoods equally. Data analytics flagged potential bias in stops and arrests. Community policing moved beyond slogans. Officers were assigned to specific neighborhoods for extended periods, attending local events, meeting residents, learning names and stories. They walked beats in pairs, often partnering veterans with newcomers to share reform practices. The department's budget priorities shifted dramatically. Military-style equipment was sold off. the funds redirected to mental health response teams and youth outreach programs. Officers received additional pay for learning local languages and pursuing advanced conflict resolution training. Policy changes reached every level. The use of force continuum was completely revised, emphasizing de-escalation at every step. Chokeholds were banned and warrior-style training was replaced with guardian approaches. Every policy was published online, open for public comment. Internal Affairs transformed into the Office of Professional Responsibility, with expanded powers and direct civilian oversight. Complaints were tracked transparently, with regular public reports on outcomes. Officers who reported misconduct received protection from retaliation. The police union's new leadership embraced reform, negotiating contracts that balanced officer protection with accountability. They supported mental health programs, regular rotations to prevent burnout, and peer intervention training to help officers stop misconduct before it escalated. Educational requirements increased. New officers needed college credits in social services or related fields. Existing officers received paid time for continuing education, with promotions tied to advanced training in community relations and cultural awareness. The department's relationship with schools evolved. The old resource officer model was replaced with a community liaison program. Officers taught classes on civil rights and constitutional law, while students shadowed police to learn about reform procedures. Reform extended to equipment and appearance. Patrol cars were redesigned to look less intimidating. Uniforms became more casual for community interaction. Even the department's logo changed, replacing militant imagery with symbols of service and protection. The evidence room underwent complete reorganization with multiple layers of oversight and digital tracking. Property seizure policies were overhauled, requiring court approval for any confiscation. Auction proceeds went to community programs rather than department funds. Recruitment efforts targeted local youth, especially from historically over-policed neighborhoods. The department offered scholarships and mentoring programs, building a pipeline of officers who understood both law enforcement and community perspectives. Technology upgrades included a new public interface. Residents could track their complaints, access incident reports, and view department statistics in real time. Regular town halls allowed direct dialogue between officers and citizens, with feedback incorporated into policy updates. The physical changes to the police station symbolized deeper transformations. The bulletproof glass came down from the reception area. The waiting room filled with comfortable furniture and community information. Children's artwork decorated hallways once lined with militant posters. As reforms took root, measurable changes emerged. Use of force incidents dropped significantly. Complaint resolution satisfaction increased. Survey data showed growing trust between police and residents, especially in historically marginalized communities. The most profound change was cultural. Officers began reporting misconduct without fear, supporting colleagues through difficulties rather than covering up mistakes. The U.S. versus them mentality faded, replaced by a genuine service orientation. Chief Rodriguez marked each improvement with quiet determination, knowing that reform required constant vigilance. "We're not just changing policy," she often said. "We're changing hearts and minds, one interaction at a time." Michael Harrison stood in his remodeled office, now decorated with photos of successful prosecutions and community events rather than the grim reminders of past corruption. The changes in Millbrook had transformed him too, softening some edges while sharpening others. Sarah's real estate practice had evolved into a fair housing consultancy, helping other communities identify and address systemic discrimination. Her eyes sparkled with purpose now, the stress lines around them speaking more of satisfaction than worry. Sometimes, she told Michael, fighting the good fight gives you more than it takes. Emma graduated as valedictorian, her speech touching on justice and change without mentioning the personal cost her family had paid. She'd grown from a teenager shouldering unfair burdens into a young woman with unshakable principles. Harvard Law School had already accepted her early application. James Walker's recovery became a journey of emotional as well as physical healing. He mentored younger students, sharing his story not as a victim but as a survivor. His basketball dreams had transformed into a passion for civil rights law, his experience fueling his determination to create lasting change. Rachel Walker expanded her practice to include counseling for both victims and reformed officers, building bridges where walls once stood. Her understanding of trauma and healing helped guide the department's new approach to community relations. Growth, she observed, happens on both sides of the badge. Angela Martinez received a National Teaching Award for her curriculum on civic responsibility. Her students learned to question authority thoughtfully, document truth carefully, and stand up for justice bravely. The shy chemistry teacher had become a powerful voice for educational reform. Officer Rodriguez grew into her role as chief, her initial uncertainty replaced by quiet confidence. She balanced accountability with compassion, understanding that true reform required both. Her own journey from skeptical patrol officer to change leader inspired a new generation of police. Ashley Reed reconciled with her mother, both women stronger for having chosen truth over comfort. They started a support group for families dealing with law enforcement corruption, turning their pain into purpose. Ashley's college essays about moral courage earned her multiple scholarships. The Harrison family found new rhythms, their dinner conversations ranging from legal strategy to community projects. The threats had stopped, replaced by thank you notes and invitations to speak at reform conferences. Their home became a gathering place for change makers and bridge builders. Sarah discovered unexpected allies among former opponents. Real estate developers who'd once shunned her now sought her expertise in inclusive community planning. Her professional network expanded beyond Millbrook, spreading the lessons of change to other towns. Emma's basketball team reflected the town's transformation. Girls from both sides of the old divide played together, their friendships extending beyond the court. She led them to state championships, but her proudest achievement was their unity off the court. James Walker walked across the stage at his high school graduation, his gait still showing signs of injury, but his head held high. His college acceptance letters covered a wall at home, each one a victory over those who tried to limit his future. Harrison found himself changing too, learning to balance justice with mercy. He started a mentoring program for young prosecutors, teaching them to seek truth rather than just convictions. His father's badge, once a reminder of loss, became a symbol of positive change. The personal growth extended through generations. Thompson's granddaughter joined Emma's youth advocacy group. Reed's son volunteered at Rachel's clinic. The children of former opponents found ways to heal their parents' divisions. Sarah's transformation showed in small ways: her increased laughter, her relaxed shoulders, her willingness to take family vacations again. The constant vigilance of the trial years eased into confident awareness. She started writing a book about fair housing reform. Emma's choice of law school reflected her evolution. Instead of fleeing Millbrook's memory, she planned to return after graduation, committed to continuing the work of reform. Her personal statement described not victimhood but victory, not survival but transformation. Harrison watched his family flourish, their growth intertwined with Millbrook's changes. The costs they'd paid seemed smaller now, measured against the benefits of living in truth. Their scars had become medals, their struggles stepping stones to strength. In quiet moments, he reflected on how far they'd all come. The fear was gone, replaced by determination. The isolation had ended, transformed into purposeful connection. They'd grown not despite the challenges, but because of them, each difficulty adding another layer of resilience. The personal growth continued, as lasting change always does, in small moments and quiet victories. Each day brought new opportunities to choose courage over comfort, truth over tradition, growth over stagnation. Millbrook had changed them all, and they had changed Millbrook. Even as Millbrook celebrated its transformation, new challenges emerged on the horizon. Detective Marcus Thompson uncovered evidence of corruption extending beyond county lines, suggesting a broader network of police misconduct still operating in neighboring jurisdictions. Anonymous threats began appearing again, this time targeting the Civilian Oversight Board members. The messages carried a different tone, more sophisticated, less overtly violent, but equally determined to maintain old power structures in surrounding communities. Rachel Walker's clinic reported increased cases of subtle intimidation from departments outside Millbrook. Patients described being followed, receiving mysterious tickets, facing unexplained delays in government services. The tactics had evolved, becoming harder to document and prove. Chief Rodriguez faced resistance from regional law enforcement agencies, some refusing to share intelligence or cooperate on cross-jurisdictional cases. The blue wall had shifted but not crumbled, adapting to protect itself beyond Millbrook's reformed borders. State legislators, pressured by police unions, proposed bills to limit civilian oversight powers. The language was careful, wrapped in concerns about officer safety and operational efficiency, but the intent was clear: to prevent other towns from following Millbrook's example. Harrison watched these developments with growing concern. The victory they'd achieved in Millbrook had sparked hope, but it had also revealed how deeply entrenched systemic problems remained in American law enforcement. Each solved problem seemed to unveil three more waiting beneath it. The question now wasn't just about maintaining Millbrook's reforms, but about extending them beyond city limits. The next battle was taking shape, and it promised to be even more challenging than the last. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's renovated police station as Harrison arrived for what he thought would be a routine meeting. Instead, he found James Walker standing in Chief Rodriguez's office, now wearing a crisp FBI badge on his belt. "We've been building a federal task force," James explained, his smile carrying echoes of both past pain and future purpose, "focusing on police reform and accountability across the country. We want Millbrook to be our pilot training center." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The young man, once brutalized by corrupt officers, would now help train the next generation of law enforcement. His journey from victim to change agent embodied everything Millbrook had fought to achieve. Emma, home from her first year of law school, joined the project as a legal consultant. Sarah's fair housing work expanded into a national program. Rachel's trauma-informed policing protocols were being adopted by departments nationwide. But the most surprising change came from an unexpected source. Ashley Reed, visiting her father in prison, emerged with his signed confession not just to his own crimes, but to a decades-old mystery: the location of Thomas Harrison's missing notebook, containing evidence that could expose corruption across multiple states. As Harrison held his father's recovered notebook, he realized Millbrook's story wasn't ending, it was evolving into something larger. The town had become more than a cautionary tale, it was now a blueprint for transformation, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal into sources of strength. The wheel of justice had come full circle, and the next revolution was just beginning. Hey everyone, that ending really hit hard, didn't it? If this story of justice and transformation moved you, please hit that subscribe button to support our storytelling team. Every like, share, and comment helps us bring more powerful narratives like this to light. What did you feel watching justice unfold in Millbrook? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share this with someone who believes in the power of change. And hey, should we explore what happens next? Let us know if you're ready for part 2. There's so much more to this story.